Not every largely underrated piece of cinema has been lucky enough to receive the prestigious cult classic treatment, but as seen in one particularly brilliant Reddit thread this list was inspired by, that still hasn't stopped certain fans of these hilarious, ridiculous or jaw-dropping gems from banging the drum for their under-the-radar darlings. So from the undervalued superhero flicks that were bringing joy before the MCU era, to those black comedy gifts that keep on giving with every revisit. These are those films that were so very close to becoming an absolute cult classic. Gareth here from Whatculture.com, and here are movies that deserve to become cult classics but didn't. Logan Lucky. Gathering together an embarrassment of acting riches in the form of a Daniel Craig having the time of his life away from all things 007, Adam Driver delivering the goods as usual, and Channing Tatum once again showing off his unexpectedly brilliant comedic chops, Steven Soderbergh's 2017 Heist comedy felt like it held all the tools to become a serious cult hit for the ages, even if the titular Logan brothers were a little less well equipped. In the time since it actually picked up some widely positive reviews upon its release, however, perhaps the director's most underrated entry to date has largely found itself being unfortunately forgotten and underappreciated for the well-constructed dose of laugh-out-loud joy Logan Lucky routinely is. Everyone involved clearly put their all into producing one of the most gloriously entertaining robbery attempts ever committed to the big screen, with Craig in particular showing off his ability to effortlessly slip into the more eccentric characters out there as Joe Bang, long before his Benoit Blanc days. But that still couldn't keep this star-studded showing from also being hit with the Logan family curse in the end. Upgrade. Arriving on the scene in the same year as another flick involving a central figure being hijacked from within, Upgrade very much felt like the film Sony's Venom wanted to be at one point or another, before it ultimately decided to play it a little safer in the PG-13 realm. And while the often shockingly violent but regularly side-splitting outing for STEM and Logan Marshall Green's Grey Trace actually brought home an impressive $17 million on a $3 million budget, the fact Lee Whannell's little body-controlling outing popped up on the scene around the same time as Marshall Green lookalike Tom Hardy's symbiote box office monster has ultimately overshadowed many a memory of yet another Blumhouse success. In Upgrade, there's definitely the right amount of glorious silliness and genuinely outstanding action and one-liners to leave horror, sci-fi and comedy lovers with a massive smile on their face throughout the 100-minute runtime. Instead of becoming another lovable B-movie to add to the cult classic list though, this 2018 feature hasn't exactly been ignored altogether in the time since its release, but it's nowhere near as celebrated or adored by a corner of the cinema fandom as many felt it potentially would be. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. In another case of looking at the folks involved and wondering how in the holy hell this particular project hasn't gone on to become a cherished player in the cult classic world, Shane Black's black comedy crime picture by the name of Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is undoubtedly adored by some, but nowhere near as much as it should be, or even some of the director's other once underrated showings like The Nice Guys for example, combining a pre-Iron Man Robert Downey Jr. with a Val Kilmer who was clearly loving every second of delivering Black's excellent dialogue, and dropping the odd improvised gem into the mix. What definitely ranks as one of all three talented figures' most overlooked performances sadly didn't exactly gobble up the millions at the box office, and while the reviews were strong at the time of its arrival, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang just hasn't ever grown into the all-round cult classic it definitely had the makings to be for a time. If you haven't had the pleasure of watching RDJ and Kilmer's Harry and Gay Perry respectively, bickering and showing off some of the finest on-screen chemistry of the noughties in this neo-noir should-be classic though, then do go and treat yourself. Sky High. While the superhero genre wasn't exactly non-existent at the time of Sky High's debut back in 2005, this was still a time pre-MCU, and the average movie fan simply wasn't as hot on all things capes and spandex back when Disney first decided to dabble in the live-action supersphere with this Kurt Russell in a supersuit boasting adventure. Admittedly, many of the youngsters who grew up with Will Stronghold's attempts to live up to his world-famous super parents are quick to salute this coming-of-age journey with additional super shenanigans. That being said, despite there being the odd group who confess to being Sky High supporters through and through, this attempt to navigate both the struggles of high school and being the next generation of superheroes still hasn't quite graduated to the point of being a full-blown cult classic yet. Much like Will, this one is most definitely a late bloomer though, so there's every chance this sidekick of a feature, showcasing outstanding work from the likes of Russell, Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Bruce Campbell, will continue to gain popularity on Disney Plus and get the hero support it deserves in the coming years. 7 Psychopaths. When the name Martin McDonagh enters the average movie conversation, most folks would be all too happy to point to a number of his simply magnificent creations as one-off, if not their outright favourite feature. Yet while many would be quick to heap praise on the likes of In Bruges, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, and even his most recent offering of The Banshees of Inisherin, 2012's 7 Seven Psychopaths doesn't quite get the same level of appreciation from McDonagh diehards and film fans in general, again bringing with it a collection of superb heavy hitters in the form of Christopher Walken, Colin Farrell, Sam Rockwell and Woody Harrelson. This tale of dognapping gone even more wrong became yet another critically praised release for the eventual Academy Award nominated director, and with it possessing the same sort of riotous dark wit and colourful characters seen in McDonagh's other more celebrated works, Seven Psychopaths definitely seemed destined to become a source of eternally memorable one-liners and go-to satirical classic for generations to come. As of recording though, this collection of nutjobs are still yet to really steal the hearts of more than a select few of McDonagh lovers. Election. Taking its spot here is yet another film that has unquestionably been appreciated by a decent amount of fans over the years, without ever fully becoming an out-and-out cult classic. The Reese Witherspoon starring 1999 black comedy known as Election feels like the sort of film tailor-made for cult hit status. Despite not exactly succeeding at the box office, the satirical flick centered around a high school student body election and one particularly driven student president candidate by the name of Tracy Flick earned a ton of critical praise when it dropped at the end of the century. Yet in the wake of picking up an Academy Award nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay, the film largely went under the radar for the decades that followed, with Election's razor-sharp script and top-class performances from Witherspoon and Matthew Broderick only being revisited by a particularly small class of supporters. That being said, the fact the adaptation of the 1998 Tom Perrotta novel of the same name has since earned itself a sequel adaptation of the author's 2022 follow-up novel Tracy Flick Can't Win may help shed some more light on the cherished by some high school picture in the coming years. Welcome to the jungle of The Rundown. Kicking off a jungle trend that would ultimately make itself known throughout a great many of Dwayne Johnson's big screen adventures, 2003's Welcome to the Jungle, also known as The Rundown and not to be mistaken with his Jumanji sequel outing, offered yet another early glimpse at the movie star potential within this one-time WWE sensation. But even with that being the case, and the story of a bounty hunter named Beck trying to get his hands on Sean William Scott's Travis, showing off some unexpectedly tremendous chemistry between the starring duo, this particularly bombastic action explosion just hasn't quite grown into a home video and streaming cult favourite in the way you might have expected on the back of an unquestionably poor box office performance. Absolutely crazy fight sequences, just the right amount of cheese-stuffed quotes, and brilliant supporting performances courtesy of Rosario Dawson and a Christopher Walken going full ham. The Rundown absolutely deserves to be talked about as one of the most enjoyable, dumb chunks of action one could ever hope to consume when on the lookout for a quick hit of a shotgun-wielding Johnson. And who knows, if a much-discussed sequel does actually become a thing down the road, perhaps the first Rundown will finally be given the cult classic action reappraisal the surreal visual of The Rock being attacked by a monkey deserves. Evolution. Another Sean William Scott outing that often slips through the cracks when discussing those pictures that contain all the ingredients necessary to potentially cement themselves as eventual cult classics. 2001's Evolution is honestly one of the early 2000s greatest overlooked comedy gems. This is a film that spits out what should have been instantly iconic exchanges such as Orlando Jones' Harry requesting some ice cream for his ass after a particularly nasty extraterrestrial insect invasion. And yet the Ivan Reitman flick about a meteor crashing into Earth and the inhabitants within quickly and hilariously evolving to our atmosphere still hasn't managed to evolve into a genuine cult comedy classic over the last 20 years. Sure, the CGI is a bit dated and not every laugh lands as well as the last, but there's still a lot of fun to be had in this David Duchovny and Julianne Moore starring monster movie, even if it's not quite as adored as Reitman's Ghostbuster tales. Simply put, any film boasting William Scott caw-cawing into a microphone to an alien dragon terrorizing a shopping mall deserves its flowers, dammit. Mystery Men, the real superhero movie that started it all. Long before the Avengers were trying to keep Thanos from snapping his purple sausages, or the Justice League did whatever the hell that was back in 2017, a super ensemble epic for the ages was unleashed onto the scene back in 1999 by the name of Mystery Men. There were no pitiful Captain Americas or Supermen to be found here, folks. Instead, it was down to the likes of Ben Stiller's Mr. Furious, Hank Azaria's Blue Raja, and William H. Macy's The Shoveler to save the day. And the end result is the most ridiculous of times. Though it's justifiably classed as something of a box office dud, the Mystery Men's farcical mission to take down Casanova Frankenstein would eventually go on to become a household favourite for some. However, utter that title to the average film fan, and it's not uncommon to be met with a rather puzzled look. Trust me, I've been there. And said confusion only increases with the unleashing of a few shiny forks and immortal pieces of wisdom such as I don't need a compass to tell me which way the wind shines. And so, Mystery Men unfortunately finds itself in that frustrating middle ground of not quite being popular enough within a corner of the movie fandom to earn the title of cult classic, but still being a largely ignored super spoof by much of the mainstream audience. And what a damn shame that is, eh?